I was an intern chaplain at a nursing home some 3 years ago, and I got pretty used to death, as used to death as and comfortable as one can be. After a weekend off, one Monday, I asked one of the nurses, "What happened to Frank? Did Frank get moved?" "Frank expired," she said. Initially, I was taken back, thinking to myself, hey, Frank is not some carton of eggs or some jug of milk. How can he expire? I asked the nurse to use a different word, if she could. And a couple of weeks later, there was a similar situation. I went to check on Joe, and Joe wasn't there. I asked, "Where's Joe? I don't see him in his room." "Joe is with St. Peter," she said. Not sure that I like that anymore. But little did I know that at the time, expired actually means to emit breath. And in this case, one's last breath. A rather beautiful way to acknowledge someone's death. It's no secret, we are dependent on the air we breathe. Or more precisely put, we are dependent on the oxygen in the air. Some of you may have asthma or other problems breathing, and you realize this dependency more than others. I once witnessed my oldest sister have an asthma attack, and in her grasp for breath and struggles, it reminded me how I take my breath and the air for granted. We mark our lifespans by the breaths of air we take, and I'm looking forward to my son's birth and his first breath of air. Right now, we're thinking of naming him Miles. My wife is from Germany, where most of her family still lives. And recently, someone asked me, "Miles, oh, that's an interesting name. Is there a German equivalent?" And I said, "Kilometers." But I can't wait to see Miles' first breath. And I know that at some point, all of us, we will breathe our last. But we cannot live on air alone. The oxygen in the air does help us obtain energy, yes. But it is our deep breaths that nourish us spiritually. Most of the time, when we breathe, we're really breathing from our upper chest. We're breathing shallow breaths. And I really think there's something magical about deep breaths. And if any of you has ever taken singing lessons, your singing instructor will tell you to breathe deep. I remember my singing instructor telling her to put my hand on my diaphragm to feel the deep breath, to not breathe from the upper chest. And I think there's, like I said, something magical about that. And that's why maybe after a great choir rehearsal, there's sort of a singing high. After a great choir performance, a singing high. So similarly, we here singing together, we breathe together. Every time we sing here, we are breathing in air together, exhaling the troubles and pain, inhaling the peace we have together in this mysterious and sacred moment. There are many traditions which have a blatant connection between spirit and breath. The ancient Hebrew word ruach actually means spirit, breath, and or wind. In the Hebrew scriptures, ruach Elohim is normally translated as spirit of God, but it could also be translated as breath of God. You see, it doesn't matter. They are one and the same. Just as the breath is the source of life, spirit is the source of an abundant life. Of course, Hinduism and Hatha Yoga have a whole series of breathing techniques. And of course, all the many forms of meditation all reference the breath. So air and breathing it in is important to us on many, many levels. Sometimes all we need is a little breathing room, this sanctuary perhaps, or nature. Really anywhere we pause and notice our breath and spirit, we can find that breathing room. Ruach Elohim, the spirit, wind, breath, pulsing, vibrating, flowing, moving in us, like the up and down motion of a raven above flapping its wings, like the tide coming in and out, like the canyon winds, like the flow of the Rio Grande, like our lungs, in and out. And we are called and led into our breath. And there we just might realize that we are somewhere between our first and our last. If we pay attention to all those deep breaths in between, our inhalations will fill us with the breath of life, the spirit of life. This ruach, this breathing in of air, pulsing, hovering, your spirit, yet somehow other. Have you felt it moving? Have you found yourself drawn into its rhythm? It has been said that we breathe in the same air as the Buddha, as Moses, Esther, Jesus, Muhammad, Rumi, Teresa of Avila, and Gandhi, that the same oxygen molecules that were in them could very well be in us as well. The air they breathed is also our air. The air is everyone's, including the future's. Though air seems like a constant, it is like everything else. It is in flux and changing. As I'm about to have my first child, I ponder, what will the air be like for him? What will the earth be like for him? Will the Rio Grande still flow? Will this valley that has nourished human life for thousands of years remain habitable? What are we leaving to all the generations that come after us? So between these two great breaths of air, let us all have the faith to pause, to breathe, to listen to our very own calling, to remain steadfast in the promise and the risk that we all celebrate this Earth Day.
By now, we've all heard the statistics. Greenhouse gases are getting trapped in the air around the Earth, in the atmosphere, causing the planet to warm. The most prevalent one is carbon dioxide, which comes from the burning of fossil fuels and from cutting down the forests that used to filter carbon dioxide back out of the air. There used to be 275 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the air around us. That's the environment in which life formed and civilization took shape. And then humans started burning fossil fuels at a rapid rate. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere started increasing. With industrialization, it accelerated. Now we're at 400 parts per million, and we're adding 2 more every year. The globe has already warmed 1 degree. Doesn't sound like much, but glaciers are melting, threatening the clean water supply of millions of people. Mosquitoes are spreading, bringing with them deadly diseases like malaria. Droughts are increasing. New Mexico has just had 4 years of it. threatening food production. And sea levels are rising, threatening to put major world cities underwater by the end of this century. The scale of the problem is huge. A few weeks ago, a guest preacher delivered a whole sermon on this matter, and afterward, many of you told me how hopeless you felt. You recycle and you reuse things as much as you can. You have reusable grocery bags. You've changed to energy-efficient light bulbs, or you plan to, right? And you're cutting back on driving as much as you can, some of us more than others. It's hard to remember sometimes. And after all, we're set up in a society that was designed to use energy. It's hard to get around without a car, especially if you have children or other physical limitations. I remember feeling like walking places with my young children was like dragging 2 elephants around behind me. We always went so slow. Now that they're teenagers, I can't remember what I was in such a hurry for, but I do remember the feeling of their little hands in mine, and jumping over sidewalk cracks, and picking dandelions that grew in the sediment along the curb. You do what you can, and you know it matters, but you also know it'll take more than changing your light bulbs or cutting back on driving to fix this. You know, and I know. What is a preacher to say? The problem is so vast. It was created by so many people in so many different countries, and huge multinational corporations are fighting hard, lobbying with lots of money to prevent much change from happening. And we are implicated. We are implicated every time we burn coal, oil, or gas. Every time we turn on the heat or turn on a light. Heck, sometimes it seems like everything we do is caught up in this because everything is so manufactured, right? It was made in these huge energy-guzzling plants that also contributed to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Or we drink coffee that isn't shade-grown, and it was grown using land that was cleared of rainforest, right? Even our coffee isn't sacred anymore. We are implicated. Even sending an email uses energy that was produced by burning fossil fuels. And when we hear this, it feels so heavy. It feels so hopeless. You know, it just feels like an unstoppable train that's in movement already. And you think, I might as well just lay down on the tracks, you know? Or at least take a nap because freaking out is exhausting, okay? And then while you're lying there, maybe you do turn into your breath. You tune into your breath a little bit. You get centered again. You get mindful. And in the silence, God speaks. Or if you're an atheist, as we all are sometimes, and some of us are all the time, maybe in the silence, clarity happens. And we start to see not only what's frightening, but what's possible, what's hopeful, what's already happening. Yeah? Like the fact that despite what we hear in the news, we're living in a time of relative peace on Earth. The world's major powers are at peace with each other. They're not warring over territory or nuclear arms or resources right now. They aren't threatening each other with devastation. You'd have to go back hundreds of years to find a time this peaceful, actually. In fact, on the whole, we're living in one of the most peaceful times in human history. Poverty has been reduced more in the last 50 years than in the previous 500 years. And not only that, but it's an era of education. Over the last 4 decades, the number of men earning a college degree around the world has gone up 4 times, and the number of women has gone up 7 times. Education's becoming more accessible. Organizations like Khan Academy and even Harvard University are offering free classes online that anyone with internet anywhere can take. We live in an astonishing time in which progress is rapid and it continues accelerating, building on itself. And it's a time when things go global, when large numbers of people around the world develop common frameworks and they access the same information through the internet. And when a single corporation can have a global impact for good, too. International collaboration, while not always perfect, happens. In fact, it's worked well enough to stop outbreaks of deadly diseases from becoming global pandemics. Ebola, H1N1. And in the middle of all this, there's also more environmental awareness and action now than there ever has been before in the history of humankind. Countless individuals acting, and many of them as part of small groups, which may be part of larger groups, all putting thought and attention into solving this challenge that we all have before us. In fact, this service is an example of that. This service is part of a preach-in which ministers all over the U.S. are preaching on climate change. This church is a member of New Mexico Interfaith Power and Light, an environmental organization that is part of a national interfaith Power and Light. Like this service, your actions are part of a larger, even a massive network of actions. And they matter. So I invite you to stay mindful. Be hopeful. Be present. You don't have to do everything yourself. It's enough just to do what you can. This church's EarthWeb team has made it easy for you to take one action right now. There is a postcard-sized piece of paper inside your order of service that you can sign, and you can place them in the basket James and I will have next to us in the receiving line. Or you can take them to the EarthWeb table in the social hall during coffee hour, where they have lots of other information about things you can do that matter. Or if you're in a hurry, you can even place the postcard on the welcome table on your way out.